I'm Director of the British Council in Hong Kong, which is an enormous privilege. And I'm slightly intimidated in this magnificent hall, looking at so many people. I'd like to invite our various speakers and partners to join me up here on stage. I'm not going to say very much about the whole event because others will, not least Antony Gormley himself, but I hope you're as excited as I am about the whole thing. Our host is not me, really, it's Professor John Burns from the University of Hong Kong. John, could you come and join us? John is Dean of Social Sciences, Chair Professor of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. Yeah, why not? The university is, we're proud to say, one of the institutional partners for the event. And John told me to say that the project resonates with the Sociology Department's Media, Culture and Creative Studies Department and various activities they'll be carrying out with and around Event Horizon over the next 6 months. But enough of me. Please, Professor Burns.
To welcome you to this launch week activity for Event Horizon Hong Kong. And this evening we are privileged to hear from Sir Antony Gormley, who's going to speak to us about the sculptures that we find around the city. I myself, I confess, I have yet to see them. I have seen photos of them, but they speak to me. And what do they say? They say to me, individuals, you know, on the street at a height, emphasizing the verticality of our city and the loss of community of our city. This is what they say to me. So I'm interested to hear what Sir Antony has to say and how he will discuss this with us this evening. I am thrilled that we are institutional partners with this event, and once again, welcome to the University of Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the project has 23 partners overall, but the most significant partnership we have is with our lead partner, the K11 Art Foundation. I'd like to, in a minute, introduce and invite Adrian Cheng to come up and say a few words about K11 Art Foundation's involvement, but it's just worth saying that Adrian's involved with various international museums, institutions. He's on the board of the West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, M+. He's a trustee of the Royal Academy of Arts, Tate's International Council member, and so on. So, I mean, this is a serious contribution to what's happening in the art world. And in particular, I think the K11 Art Foundation is involved in incubating emerging contemporary Chinese artists and curators and promoting public art education. Many collaborations with institutions around the world, including the ICA in London, the Palais de Tokyo, and the Centre Pompidou in that city, Paris, which is suffering so much at the moment. So without any more, I'd like to invite Adrian to please say a few words.
Thank you, Robert and John. It is an honor and pleasure to be here today at the inaugural artist talk by the highly acclaimed artist, Antony Gormley. First of many programs under Event Horizon, this marks the beginning of the biggest ever public art project in Hong Kong. Event Horizon is an important public art project that brings the best of artistic talent to Hong Kong and Asia. This is a synergy with the mission of the K11 Art Foundation to promote public art education or art for the mass. As a lead partner of this project, K11 Art Foundation has been working closely with the artists and British Council to develop education and outreach programs for students and the general public of Hong Kong. We are committed to believe that all greater cities cultivate art and culture. Hong Kong is a special place geographically, historically, and culturally, and Event Horizon just adds to its appeal. Public art makes the everyday life better and enhances the living experience of Hong Kong inhabitants, domestic and from abroad, to live, to work, and play amongst art. For art to be seen outside of museum space at a place that belongs to the people, the public realm, and to be on show 24 hours a day is really exciting. I've always said, in art we live, and now this finally becomes true. This is a historical moment for the city to break down barriers and have art for all to enjoy. We invite everyone to experience this project, to see and feel a bit of ourselves within the city we're living in. Now, please give a very warm welcome to Antony Gormley to share his thoughts with us. Thank you.
I'm just going to say thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I did warn Antony that I was going to say that it's a little known secret that he owes everything to the British Council, in the sense that his first show was in 1980 in Milan, and it was courtesy of the foresight of some of my colleagues then at the British Council. That's true, is it not?
It is.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Professor Burns. Thank you, the university. Thank you for this extraordinary space. I've called this talk Making Space. I hope that we can make it together. I've got notes, but I don't really want to use them. I'd rather use the collective energy in this space now to think about art, to think about, in a way, what art has been and what it could be for us as a collective human community. I attended to what you had to say, Professor Burns. I think that nobody asked for art to be privatized. Art has always been a focus for human thoughts and feelings about present time and about future. It's been a focus for our hopes and fears. I think it remains so. It's a huge honor to talk in a university. A university is a place where, in a way, the instrument of the mind is used to attend to often the great discoveries of the past in order to create a potential human future. I think art has a part to play in that process. So it means a lot to me to be here today, talking in this context. I have a lot to learn from you, so I'm really looking forward to the third part of this evening. I'm going to first sort of give, and forgive me, those of you who come from the art history department, I'm going to talk briefly and very broadly about art history that I studied once before going to India for a few years and then finally ending up at art school age 23. I left art school at the age of 30 and I think I've been a student ever since. I think it's the only way to be. I think that life is a learning experience. But anyway, this is the history part. For most of the art history that I was taught, that started with Gombrich's wonderful story of art, the story of Giotto to Cézanne, the story of, in a way, the making of pictures. The idea that actually it was successive schema of making a cogent representation of the way the world looks that was the thing that drove art forwards. And in that time, art was very much at the service of power, and often in portraiture was used to represent power. Now, I'm hoping in the third part of this lecture that you will tell me how this place has contested, in a sense, power. But you're going to tell me about local politics, and I'm going to tell you about how I feel the potency of art can again become a place in which collective identity can be tested, felt, and focused. So what happened in the 20th century? Incredible things. From that first painting of Braque's, of a landscape with houses in it, I think it was 1903, Cubism. The idea that actually an artist's perhaps first job was to look at the way the world was put together and find in the manner in which he painted it something about the syntax, the structure of making an image. And there started, in a way, that critical process that lasted really throughout the 20th century of art examining itself. Oh, good, we haven't got a slide yet. You know, you have to wait for the slides. Art examining its own methodology. And obviously, Cubism was a kind of follower of Impressionism. You then had Fauvism, Orphism, Expressionism, then abstract expressionism, then minimalism. And maybe, you know, by the end of the 20th century, in fact, that self-analysis within, anyway, the history of Western art ended in conceptualism. The idea of the dematerialized object that in a sense replaced Impressionism's idea of a democratic principle. Impressionism said, well, what we should really be focusing on is the basis of how light hits substance and give an impression of that, in which color and landscape, not people on horses and grand houses and the portraits of kings and queens, should really be the subject of art. And conceptualism made a similar proposition, which was that somehow art didn't have to be owned at all because it was actually objectless. It was an idea and could be owned by anybody who was prepared to entertain that idea. What I've come, you're obviously desperate to see slides. Am I boring you already? It's quite possible. I bore myself often. I've come here today to tell you that we're liberated from both of those histories. The history of, in a way, art serving power, and the history of art analyzing its own structures. And I think this is a really important moment. And in a small way, this little project, this little experiment, that by implication of you being here, but also by implication of you living in Hong Kong, you are participators in, is that actually art is now an open space of possibility. Gombrich had this wonderful phrase which he called the beholder's share. And Duchamp had the same idea, the father of conceptualism. And he talked about the viewer doing 50% of the work. Well, if the old idea of art was that it supported the status quo by representing the hierarchy, the new idea is that actually there cannot be hierarchy. We have to find our own meaning. The significance of a work comes from the active participation of a viewer, who isn't just, as it were, recognizing something already known, but is prepared to be at that threshold that an art object offers, which is a view onto the future, onto that which has not yet been, onto the unknown. And maybe that's something that art can do uniquely. I'm a bit of a fraud. I'm standing here talking to you. I make silent, still things that don't say a word and don't move. And that's the power of sculpture, that it has stillness and silence, but it is in space. It lives in the world with us, and in the degree that it displaces space, it offers us an opportunity to project onto that place our own thoughts and feelings, hopes and fears. So I think that for me, this project, I mean, coming here, what are the first things you see in terms of sculpture in Hong Kong? Well, there's a wonderful copy of the Lutyens' cenotaph. There's old Jackson from the end of the 19th century, the original HSBC statue square. There's the Henry Moore and the Frink in Exchange Square, and some Jumings. But I don't think that's the only job that art can do, either do that thing of the cenotaph. It's an important thing. It's an important thing that art can do, which is to remind us of the past, remind us of the sacrifices that those that have fought for, in a way, the freedoms of the West. It's not a bad thing that Jackson is there, that reminds us, in a way, something about the history of this place and its, I think, social dimensions, and maybe something about its reality. But there are, I think, other extraordinary things that art can do. And I think this is the moment in which those freedoms that artists took to themselves, what Giacometti and Brancusi did, which was to say, I'm going to withdraw into the studio, my sanctuary, and remake the world on my own terms. I am not going to be dictated to by patrons. I'm going to express my self-determination, the right that I have to not only view the world and make statements about it, but remake it. Bang goes the slides. On my own terms. Now, I think this is the time when those freedoms that artists took to themselves in the mid-years of the 20th century can be offered back. And art can indeed, and I'm absolutely passionate about this, art can again take up a social role. And it's very important that it does, because the human project itself, we can say, we're moving towards the time when there are going to be 10 billion of us on a limited planet. The realization of climate refugees, the migration crisis that's happening right now, what happened in Paris, the tragic events of Paris, the tensions that are existing within our world, it's not up to art to ignore them, but it is it is possible for art to be a fulcrum in which those tensions can be objectified and maybe given some form of balance, or in their benign objective correlative status, become a place of discussion. And there are projects that I've done, I'm not going to show you, that have tried to put art itself on the front line. Anyway, I think that's enough on art history. I'm now going to go into just showing you a few of the things that I've done. I always need help. Good. Oh, this was just to tell you where I was today. This is Cassius's bottom. It was absolutely true. The whole, joy of this for me, and I hope for the whole of Hong Kong, is that this project is an invitation to look up. And what an amazing thing it is to look up in Hong Kong. This was just sort of 2 o'clock this afternoon. I was amazed how many people don't look up, that eye-level thing on the street. And particularly between 12:30 and 2, when it's pretty, well, you know better than I do, it's tight on those streets and you have to watch out. But anyway, I'm hoping for more, full body collisions as a result of more people looking up. So I'm wondering whether we could turn these lights off so that we can concentrate a bit better on the slides, because I'd like to sort of help you look at the slides with a sort of reverie. Is that possible? Is there someone up there in charge of things like light? Maybe not. So this is a work actually not dissimilar to Event Horizon. There's a work in Vorarlberg in the Austrian Alps, and so what I'm really interested in is these two. So these are 2 bodies. There are 3 of my bodies, 3 still silent ones. You're going to be very glad they're still and silent. Anyway, I won't go on about that. The point is that these make a horizon. There are 100 of them, over 150 square kilometers, at about 2,000 meters above mean sea level. What are they doing? Well, they're certainly not portraiture. They're certainly not a representation in the traditional sense. They make a human horizon that looks out at an elemental world. They're certainly not in a museum. There are no labels and there's nothing telling you what they're doing there. But against their stillness, the movement of these bodies, I think, becomes very apparent. So I like the idea of acupuncture. I like the idea that these still silent foreign bodies very consciously making a continual horizontal plane through this varied topography of the landscape allows those other conscious, feeling, willing, alive human bodies to become more conscious of their passage through space and time. So what am I proposing here? I'm proposing that reflexivity replaces representation. The legitimate question which, a skier, a mountaineer, or somebody passing through that landscape might say is, what the fuck are these things doing here? And tacitly, And I mean that tacitly. Tacitly, the sculpture asks you the same question. And what are you doing here? So that idea of, I suppose, sculpture retreating into a necessary distance of uncertainty that is actually the absolute opposite of, Michelangelo needing to do the grave of Julius II. It simply tries to acknowledge some fundamental relationship between what is really an industrially made fossil that registered a particular moment of human life, hopefully at a moment of extreme alertness, and put that into an elemental condition. There are no labels, nobody's telling you what it means. But here is this thing that is made out of minerals, made out of that very same material that is at the core of this planet and gives us our density that allows us to keep on our trajectory, our gravitational trajectory through space. And simply ask the question, where does the human project fit in the scheme of things, seen against elemental time, geological time, the time of eras? And I guess, who did that? I didn't actually press this. Are you trying to move me on faster than I intend? It's probably a very good idea. Anyway, here's another horizon. It's another plane. And this was just an idea. Could we make a collective space that in a way is like being in the mountains? Burke had this wonderful phrase about the sublime. There is no beauty without some terror in it. Well, I thought, could I make a vast, this is a silly idea, but I went through with it. Could I make a vast monochrome abstraction and allow people to occupy it? So this is, that's the idea. This is a 50 meter by 25 meter horizontal plane covered in 6 tons of black paint that floats 8 meters from the ground and can be occupied by 100 people at a time. So this weighs about 82 tons. I was invited to do a retrospective, but I thought it was a bit early. And I didn't know that this was what I was going to have to make, but this was the logical outcome of investigating what this building, it's called the Deichtorhallen in Hamburg, was actually capable of doing. It's all very well being offered an exhibition, but I discovered that the floor simply could not take the weights of the works that I was thinking of showing. And in the end, the strength of the building and this desire to involve the collective body resulted in this work. And it took about 3 years, actually exactly the same time that it's taken to get Event Horizon here, to realize. So here it is. I promise you that I didn't push the button, and there's either somebody psychic or there's something very mysterious going on. Anyway, this is just to show what happens when one person decides to move quite violently. Because what this is actually an active democratic model. I've asked people to take their shoes and socks off. Somebody's definitely moving this forward. Could you stop it? Because otherwise we're going to get out of sync. It's a mirrored surface. Everybody's had to take their shoes and socks off. And any footfall on that surface is immediately transmitted through the feet to anyone else. It's like a membrane, a very taut drum. And what was extraordinary, I promise you I haven't touched this, and this is, so I'm going to put this here, and you can decide how fast this lecture is going. What was really extraordinary was that you had this extraordinary range of activities. And that idea that I had of art being potentially an instrument in which, rather than representing things, life itself became the viewed, actually became a reality. And here you can see there are people sitting down just chatting. This is really an active workshop in which the viewers become the viewed. Now what we've done is removed the obscured glass from eye level all the way around in the building. And what's going on here with these two lovers, I have to say, because they look like they're quite fond of each other. But he's no doubt pointing out to her either where he works or where they've come from. But anyway, what's happening here? It's extraordinary. This is the absolute reversal of what ordinarily happens in a museum, where, as it were, precious objects from out there are then given, as it were, this internal theatre of looking. But what these people are doing, they are looking back at the real world and attending to it, and acknowledging that it's full of stories, that actually it's full of possibility. So, for me, this Horizon Field Hamburg became a kind of paradigm for a literal open space of art that became a transformative zone in which people could do whatever they wanted in a sense. It was in the world but not quite of it, where they could reflect both visually and in a way in a dream. Some people just went up there and lay on that shiny black surface and felt the vibrations of the collective body. So yeah, for me, this Horizon Field Hamburg, and I called it Horizon Field because I wanted to make that connection with the Horizon Field in the Alps. This was a real moment of the transformation of art from an object to a place, from a noun to a verb, from something that can be owned as a physical isolated object to being a process of reflexivity, of proprioception, of people observing their own experience through the language of the body, through, in a way, their liberated feet in contact with this sensitive membrane that was transmitting, as it were, the sense of the collective body. Anyway, I'm now using this, but it's not working. Never mind, we can just look, I mean, all the wonderful things that are happening here. The interesting thing was, I was worried because it was Germany that everybody was going to be too serious, but they weren't. And it was just lovely to have this mixture of, you know, kids were often just trying to balance, because it was, I mean, this thing was just moving the whole time. It could move up to 1.78 meters, and it got quite alarming when it was like at the end of its swing. In fact, everybody had to sit down at that point, because you actually felt drunk whether you'd drunk anything or not, which is why most of the people are sitting down. Good. So here's another horizontal plane. This is this time by the sea. This is 3 kilometers of coastline on the west coast of England, near to Liverpool. again, looking at the horizon. That's what Event Horizon does. There are 100 of these works. They're all on a common plane. When the tide comes up, they disappear. So they are actively engaged in, as it were, another dimension of time. We live in mechanical time. We in some way have committed ourselves to the dominance of a temporal division that is absolute. And here, somehow that's put into another context. Human time, mechanical time is put in the context of the time of the tides. This was a very early experiment, which was really just to do with how a body could act on other bodies. So this is a work called Rearranged Desert. I made it in 1979. And again, this is moving forward at its own pace, but never mind. So I made that cairn, which was basically clearing all the stones that were within the radius of a hand-sized stone that I threw as far as I could. And then I stood on top of the cairn, this is about the end of the process, and threw those rocks, of whatever size, as far as I could, in a 360-degree circle. And this is what ended up, and this is the Rearranged Desert. And I suppose anybody might say, so what? There wasn't a sign there telling you that this astonishing event had happened. But for me, this is the beginning of an idea of thinking about edges, about bodies, not as representation, but as, in a way, a focus, the potential of displacement. And I think from this point onwards, I was trying to think of ways in which the body could be evoked without being obsessed with all of the things that has obsessed Western sculpture. The convincing use or representation of movement. This is the result of movement, but is itself still. This was a work made not very much later, and it's just called Floor. And at its core, you can see there are just the footprints of a standing man, isolated as a simple silhouette. But those contours have then been reproduced both internally and externally. And I think, I was just trying to think about, well, in a way, for all of us, our appearance belongs to the outer world, not to us. So as I stand here in front of you, I'm aware that I'm speaking to you from the other side of my appearance. And in many ways, your faces belong more to me, since you're all facing me, than they do to you. How do we bear witness to the fact that actually we all live inside a human life, inside a human body, and forget about those accidents of appearance that have been such a strong obsession anyway in the history of Western art? Well, one of the ways that I've tried to do it is by concentrating the body into a core. This is Lorraine Williams of 52, well, she was 52 at the time that I made the work. This is called Inside Australia, that I made about 13 years ago. She's a Wangata native Australian, a member of one of the two tribes in Central Australia that I collaborated with to make this work. Here she is out on the site that I chose, Lake Ballard. It's 70 kilometers long, 30 kilometers wide, a salt lake. This is in the middle of the Yilgarn Craton, a part of the crust, the original crust of this planet, formed between 3.5 and 2.9 billion years ago. In it are found, this is why Western Australia is the state that supports it. It basically produces 27% of the GNP of Australia, because within that Yilgarn Craton is found uranium, gold, molybdenum, iridium, vanadium, titanium, copper, iron. Anyway, without the gold or the uranium, sadly, we made an alloy of all of those metals and made these representations, I call them insiders, of 51 of the inhabitants of this small town, Menzies, in Western Australia. What I want to do is just show you how the participatory part of this work linked in not only with the donation of their bodies in order to have them scanned, in order to produce that image that I showed you, but also in the going there to experience the work, the traceries of the journeys of those that went to do that very thing. So these lines are the lines of, actually those ones with the double lines are us taking the works out, but they were reproduced later by the lines of people walking that connected the pieces over about 11 square kilometers of this extraordinary mineral landscape made of the solarized crystalline precipitate of this muddy salt lake. And what was extraordinary, I think, was the heat would be in the summer months between 35 and 50 degrees Celsius. You have to drink about 2 liters of water an hour to survive in that environment. The surface is blinding like snow. It's again taut like a drum. And I just want to, we're now about 1.5 kilometers out into the field. The field is about 11 kilometers by about 4. And I'm just going to take you now on a 360. The pieces are sometimes visible, sometimes almost invisible. And they stretch out to the horizon like root hairs, or the hairs on a rifle. There were extraordinary mirages where in the middle of the day the heat would make everything wobble. So this is a literal form of acupuncture that has a lot to do with what I've done here, Event Horizon. In terms of spatial displacement, this tiny amount of material that is displaced from the ground and put on the skyline of your city invites a kind of participation. You're going to have to look up, you're going to have to look around, you may look without seeing, but in that process, I hope that you will begin to reconnect with this extraordinary habitat, this extraordinary city, this extraordinarily lively city. This is the last work, Jaden, he is called, six-year-old Aboriginal. There were 26 Aboriginals and 25 white folk involved in this project. And I guess, with this project, just as much as here, in an elemental landscape, just as much as in our built human habitat, I'm asking exactly the same question. Where do we fit? So, I've tried to also internalize that idea of being somehow out there. And this is a work called Blind Light, which was part of an exhibition that I made at the Hayward in 2007. It's a box about 11 meters by 11 meters by 4 meters high that contains a cloud, a luminous cloud. This is about 2,000 lux, and a very, very dense cloud, probably 7 times denser than the kind of cumulus that you see in the sky. The threshold is always open, and you're invited to cross it. And once you do cross it, you lose all distance. You are somehow conscious but disembodied. And I'm going to try and play this video just to give you a sense of what it's like in there. The extraordinary thing to me was that even though you were separated from your body, so you can't see your feet, if you hold your hand out in front,
I think you're officially gone.
But you were part of this acoustic environment.
Let's see.
Any languages? Sorry. Quite wet. It was a cloud. When you came to the edge, you became an image for those outside.
Very frightening, but good. Not knowing where you're going, where the walls are. No, not knowing where you're going. It's a bit. You lose yourself on purpose, innit?
So that planted the seed in a way of trying to make the relationship between the palpable, the perceivable, and the imaginable. And that's exactly what is here now with Event Horizon. What does Event Horizon mean? It's a phrase from cosmological physics that really describes the edge of a black hole and the point at which gravity is so great that light cannot be contained. But it also talks about the edge condition of an expanding universe where celestial objects exist, but their light will never be apparent to us at this corner of the universe? Well, I suppose for me, I'm also interested in, I need to go back to that. I'm also interested in testing this condition. We're the only animal that chooses to live within a habitat that is determined by Euclidean geometry, by the absolute principles of vertical and horizontal surfaces. And I made this work. This is also a work in Australia. It's called Room for the Great Australian Desert. I just wanted a flat 360-degree horizon. Nobody knows where this is, but it's there. That has no windows. It's simply a space. I think of this as a Buddha for the 21st century. It's a human space in space at large that asks exactly the same question. Where does the human project fit in space and time? And I think this is another way of embodying that central mind-body paradox. You know, what is the primal condition of the human consciousness? It is actually of being immersed in the darkness of the body. If you're up for it, we can just try this for a minute. Just close your eyes. I'll do it too. Close your eyes. This is very familiar to most of you because I'm sure you're all meditators. So, are we all there? Where are we now? We are in a space without dimension, without objects, without edge, that is infinite. I can hear the sound of the projector, I can hear the sound of people who obviously don't have their eyes closed because they're taking pictures. But this is the place where we all live, and that we spend most of our lives escaping from. But this is where our power, our life, and our, in a way, imagination comes from. This is the condition that the first artists, the painters of the caves, celebrated. Anyway, open your eyes. The issue for me is how do you begin to re-articulate the potential of art as this open space, and indeed the potential of each of us in terms of imaginative space at a moment of gross materialism, and at a moment that we all know where somehow the exchange value of art seems to obscure all others. Anyway, you know, one of the ways that I've tried to use the body is to kind of somehow acknowledge the dominance, the power of that second body that seems to be taking over. You know, we all have our memories now in our pockets, and we live in increasingly smart environments. We have become, in some senses, dependent upon the grid of modernity that promised so much. Anyway, here is a body that is certainly not out in elemental space or against the sky, but simply testing itself against the corner, the place at which those geometries of our habitat are most extreme, and where you get sent when you're naughty. Maybe that doesn't happen here, but that happened to me a lot. Anyway, this is another industrially made fossil, but made 8 times. And the finished work is those 8 pieces put into the corners of a room, used to frame that room and hopefully undermine the certainty. So certainly, rather than reinforcing the status quo, what this is attempting to do is to make you, as the viewer, come into this space and take up the position that maybe in traditional terms the sculpture would have taken up in the center of the room. And perhaps feel that room liberated from the determinisms of architecture. Architecture wants you to feel that things are stable, are going to carry on, are going to protect you, are going to give you shelter, give you security. And I guess with this work, I'm trying to undermine that, put this room into free fall, make you sense your own determinism as the subject of this field and this condition. I'm not going to show you very much more. There's just 2 more projects, and then we'll have the bit that I'm really interested in, which is getting a few questions from the floor. This is a recent attempt to engage the participation of the viewer. But this is actually a lying body. What you can see is a right leg. It is a huge building made out of 36 cells, made out of steel. You can examine it. It just fits in a room about 38 meters by 23. But you can also enter it. And when you enter it, there are 3 cells that are open to the ceiling and therefore illuminated, and others that are darker. That is somebody about to make their journey up the left arm. It's not necessary for you to know that you are inside a body. Each space had its own amount of light. And what I was interested in is somehow allowing people to use their entire proprioceptive. So like a bat, you had to be aware of the dimension of the space you were entering and test the environment as you explored it. And there were moments of rest. Again, the viewers becoming the viewed for other participants in this sense of exploration of the body, not dissimilar from what I'm hoping will happen here in terms of the citizens of this extraordinarily vital and complex city becoming aware of their collective body, their collective second body, this habitat. And this is the last room, which is the head, which is about 4 meters by 4 meters by 3 height, that was completely dark. But in it you could sit down and hear, very much as you pulled the experience of everyone on that floating platform, in this head you could hear the journeys of the other occupants as they moved around the other chambers of this lying building that was also a body. I'm just going to finish talking about, in a way, the logical conclusion of the replacement of your Jackson statue in Statue Square by life itself. This is the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square that was built for William IV, son of George IV. Nobody loved him enough in order to pay for the 5 times life-size equestrian statue that was supposed to go there, and somebody had the bright idea of using it for contemporary art. Rather than making a work, I invited 2,400 people to occupy that plinth over 100 days, day and night, rain and shine, about 6 years ago. And the look on this woman's face of uncertainty, concern, worry, I mean, this may be what is going to be on the looks of people's faces here, on seeing people on the edge of buildings. But that idea of art as an open space, which nevertheless conveys something about the human predicament, that allows also us to imaginatively occupy those spaces that in some way give us another view on the world, that allow the everyday to become reconsidered as an image of itself, that invite a form of collective identification and participation, that invite disgust and concern and misunderstanding, lack of understanding, a celebration of the true diversity of human expression, but also perhaps allowing for that in the viewer as well, and a celebration that that is the greatest thing that we have to offer each other. Anyway, thank you very much. So, we have 25 minutes, half an hour, if you want it, but maybe you'd rather go and have a drink somewhere. But Bob was going to do this, but I decided that it's just as easy for me to do it myself. So if any of you want to ask a question, I'm very happy to answer it. Lady on the left.
Hello. When you asked us all to close our eyes and you mentioned meditation, I meditate very regularly, and I certainly feel a very spiritual element in your artwork. And I wondered whether you also practice meditation, and whether you feel humanity has a spiritual essence that perhaps we've forgotten, and your art helps us try to remember, and what your thoughts are on this.
It's a lovely question, thank you. I think, yeah, I couldn't do the work I do without having learned Vipassana meditation in India in the early 70s. And I had to make a decision quite early on in my life I hadn't even been to art school, and I guess that was the decision I had to make. Am I going to continue, I guess, as a monk studying mindfulness, or am I going to try to make something of my love of making things? And I think in some way the meditation got into the work. So all of the works that you've seen that are body based they are full body casts of me standing. That process takes about an hour and a half. The way that I make them is as a total enclosure, so there's a need to be able to be still and not panic when that soft plaster eventually heats up and goes hard. And you've got to trust the person that is doing the job to not only plaster you in, but then cut you out. And I guess I couldn't have done that without that training of Anapana. And Vipassana is a Pali word for mindfulness of sensation. And I think that, with Horizon Field, for example, Horizon Field Hamburg, that whole idea of that platform was, in fact, as a platform for a kind of mindfulness, proprioceptive, but also perceptive of others. The vibration of their feet, certainly, but then beyond that, a perception of the collective energy of that flying carpet, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I had kind of ideas about it art historically, you could say, but they were pretty unimportant in the event of this collective agreement to be suspended by 8 very thin wires on this, very finely engineered, but in the end quite rickety, because it didn't have a. You probably noticed there was no protective barrier around the edge. There was no balustrade. There was a gap of 1.10 meters, which had steel wire across it. But anyway, I think that the spiritual question is a very difficult one to answer, because I'm not making icons for a religion, and I'm not wanting anyone to do anything other than attend to their own experience. But I think that, in these days where identity seems so powerfully constructed through the way that all of us are encouraged to be consumers, to identify with certain clothes, cars, I don't know, just things. I think it's very just. I think we know it, but it's just very important, I think, to somehow recognize that there is, as Ruskin said, there is no wealth but life itself. And to attend to being rather than doing, achieving, is a worthy thing to do. And I think that is a spiritual endeavor. It's something that needs time, and out of it values arise that are not, they're certainly not in the share index. So it seems, this is maybe a good place to think about those things. But thank you for the question.
We have a question here.
Good, thank you.
Hi. I noticed that the previous works that you were showing us were either within the kind of idealizing environment of the gallery or within extraordinary natural landscapes. Whereas Event Horizon is taking place within the built environment of Hong Kong, which can be extreme, but is itself human. And I wanted to ask you if you, to speak to the difference between working with the natural and built environment and how that affects your process and how it affects your sighting of the sculpture.
I think from the moment that I first thought of Horizon Field, the work in the Alps, I wanted to do something similar in the built environment. And I guess, the escape to the sea and the mountains is a typical romantic gesture. Modernity, you could say, comes out of the Enlightenment and the notion of rationalism giving us the structures by which social justice and indeed a balanced human future becomes possible. And the urban condition, and we know that that is our condition. We've passed the point where half of us are living in cities. We know that in order to survive when there are 10 billion of us, the only way that we can do that sustainably is to live within the city. So it was important for me to recognize, celebrate, and in a way become conscious of that condition of the urban man that I think has to become the collective condition. And it seems that by 2075, about 75% of us will be in cities, and maybe by the end of the century, 90%. And obviously the urgency now on all of us is to make sure that those cities are as sustainable as possible. Sorry, this is now getting on to another concern that I'm very concerned about, which is obviously the anthropic influence on climate. But I guess, you know, for me, that transition into a confronting, you could say, the Caspar David Friedrich Ruch figure with the contemporary condition of the city, just then makes those central questions. You know, if this is our place now, what kind of place it is, and what values does it represent? What kind, if we go on making these tall towers, how do they have to change in order to become sustainable? And what kind of life do they sustain? These are all questions. I have no answers. I just felt that it was necessary, in a way, part of the urge to move from the isolated individual object of high worth to, as it were, infections of space at large. I felt that I had to confront the city, and I've been lucky enough to do it in several locations. Yeah, another question.
We have a question here.
So actually I have been visited your sculpture in the central buildings, and I have already seen them on the rooftop of the building. So I just want to ask why you have this kind of ideas that standing the sculpture on the rooftop, on the edge of rooftop, because that's really weird to see that in Hong Kong. And the second question is, do you think that it's acceptable for Hong Kong people, because it's really a kind of new art sculpture appears in Hong Kong, and I have realized that there are some scars and marks on the sculpture. So is it an idea that you have special? Is there any special meaning for those scars or marks? Yeah, thank you.
There have been a lot of naked female bodies put on top of plinths in the history of art. These are naked male bodies put on top of buildings. They're having a conversation. The bodies are naked, not nude. So they are exposing their penises in public, but not for sexual gratification. I think the buildings they are on are buildings that hide the body or shelter it. By exposing the body on the outside building or where the building meets the sky, I guess we're just doing two things. Well, one we're talking about human vulnerability and reasserting the position of the individual within the collective, the citizen, within the city. But I think we're also just making that connection back to natural man, asking questions about what human nature is in the time of the city. And I have no answers, but I think it was important to me. You're right, the bodies are taken apart and put together. They don't hide the fact that they are made of a plaster cast that has been dismembered and then reassembled. And that deconstruction and reconstruction might have all sorts of references to Cubism, Expressionism, or whatever, is a very conscious attempt to reassert the wholeness, the gestalt of a body, and to express potential in spite of jeopardy, and to do so in a manner that calls on attention, not from heroism, but from pathos. But not from a pathos that is to do with sorrow or loss, just the potential of projection. I often think of them as reversing the the body-ground ratios of, in a way, previous art, insofar as certainly at night you see them as dark silhouettes. They are like black holes in otherwise a luminous environment. They are a present absence. They call on us to project onto them. They stand at the meeting between earth and sky, looking out, always looking out, never down, always looking to a horizon that perhaps us who are captured in the chasms of the narrow streets can't see. And I hope that they also, call to those parts of us that we can't see. They are necessarily male because I work from the inside with the part of the material world that I happen to inhabit, the only part of the material world, you could say, that I can feel from inside. And at the moment of being cast, it's very important to me that moment of mindfulness is one of alert attention to simply being, as I was trying to explain to your colleague over here. You asked, will this be acceptable? That is not a problem for me. The issue of art's acceptability, that is not its job to be acceptable. In fact, its job, I think now its job is to question, in a way, everything, but including taste. The last thing that art has to do is please people. I think it should disturb, undermine, and question. And the worst thing that can happen here is that this infection of the collective space in order to raise collective consciousness meets with indifference. Another question.
Yes, here is a question.
Hello. So you mentioned you like people to attend to their habitat. and also the lecture is called Making Space, but I noticed you didn't really touch upon cyberspace, so you probably noticed that in Hong Kong, in the MTR, most people are living in the cyberspace because the Wi-Fi or like the internet is so much better than that in the tube. So do you think the physical space is actually more worthwhile, like it's worth more of our attention, or is your work more about striking balance in a world of like too much attention on the cyberspace? Like, what's your thoughts on the interaction or the relationship between the physical space and the imaginary or the cyberspace?
Good question. Now, I'm a sculptor because I believe in first-hand experience, and I think, we all owe Tim Berners-Lee a huge, he's a hero. He's extraordinary. He has materialized collective mind. What Teilhard de Chardin talked about as the noosphere, or Vernadsky talked about as the noosphere, the kind of final encirclement of the globe with an intelligent mycelium of human communication. I mean, it's a miracle, and it's magical. I can communicate to you, whether you are here in body or not. I can transmit images and feelings almost. But the danger is that we disappear and we leave our bodies behind. And I think that sculpture, in its materiality, when I talk about the relationship between the palpable, the perceivable, and the imaginable, I think that we are based on primary, physical, sensational experience, and we lose it at our risk. People in Japan don't have sex anymore because they are in love with their machines. Well, I mean, sorry, that's very bold. And, the concern that I have is I want to use every bit of intelligent tooling that is available to us, but I want to bring those advantages. I mean, we use computer programs and modeling potentials at the studio the whole time, but I want to bring that back into the physical world, and that's what a sculpture does. And the reason that all of my sculptures are massive, the four that you'll see on the ground, they weigh 700 kilos. They won't go away. They will be around for a millennium or two. They confront you with materialized time. And I think their invitation is to reconnect with the palpable and recognize that is the basis of the imaginable. The danger of unlimited fantasy is that our capability of living fully conscious lives actually becomes etiolated. I think consciousness is rooted in the body.
We have a question here.
Good.
Thank you for coming to Hong Kong to sharing your experience with us about the public arts, and I think the Hong Kong does need more public arts experiences. But we do have an issue I'd like to seek your advice, because in our Center for Suicide Research Prevention, and there's a lady, and she called up to our center yesterday, and then she saw your sculpture, and then she expressed her feelings because there's someone who killed. She saw someone jump from the building, I think just the next building with the sculpture. And then one of the problems that she told us that she doesn't have a choice, and she had to walk the same road to the same buildings, and then it seems that the sculpture display is going to stay for 6 months. So may I know, is there any advice you can give to this lady, I think, who has been disturbed because of their experiences? Thank you.
I would tell her to go a different route. What can I say? Let us have a cup of tea together. I'm sorry about the lady, but I'm sure she'll get over it. If I can help, I'm very happy to tell her why I did it, and then maybe she can say something to me that makes me feel that it isn't worthwhile. But I'm afraid that in my not knowing her, I can only assume that her assumptions about what art is and how it should be are very different from mine, and I think that we might both learn something from an encounter. But if she's offended, I think she can choose not to look. But thanks for the question.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, I'm here.
Where are we? Sorry.
Your left side.
Ah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to ask. More than I think, almost half of the locations on which the sculptures are put are government buildings. So I believe that the Hong Kong government has given its full support on this project. And also, this project is in partnership with K11, a property and land developer in Hong Kong. So I wonder, for a public art project, how do you see this relation between the government and also a private enterprise? Does this relationship somehow influence the independence of this public art project? And also the second question is I would like to ask is how public do you think this public art project is? Because just like he just asked, the other audience just asked, there are people who feel distressed, who feel not anxious about this. In this case, how does this dialogue between the artist, the audience, and the artwork can be facilitated? Thank you.
There's a lot of questions in there. I think to answer the first one, I think in order to realize, I mentioned the fact that this has taken three years to come to pass, and I think it's the result of a very long series of conversations in which all of those questions about isn't it an offence to public decency, isn't it a disturbing image when we know that this city suffers from a very high rate of suicide and a high percentage of those suicides are from tall buildings? Isn't this a strange compromise between corporate interests and government interests? Can it really be that this doesn't have some sinister conspiracy behind it? Well, if there is one, I'm out of the loop. So far as I'm concerned, this has been about conversations between individuals that believe that a work of this nature, which is about, I believe, openness, has absolutely nothing to do with suicide, and it certainly hasn't got a lot to do with corporate values either, or actually municipal government values. It's simply an expression of, I think, a collective community's wish to signal very clearly its aliveness and alertness, and indeed open-mindedness. And when both myself and Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York, were castigated by some elements of New York society for being incredibly, what boneheaded idiot thought this was the headline of the New York Post. What boneheaded idiot thought it was a good idea in this traumatized city that has seen people falling from burning buildings in the attacks of 9/11, thought it was a good idea to put bodies back against the skyline. And Bloomberg and I had a conversation, and it was very, very clear that we felt absolutely at one on the answer to that question, which was, the extraordinary thing about this city is that it is back on its feet and standing up to be counted, and that this is a liberal city that believes in the value of art as an open space of collective imagination. And we prevailed. This idea that somehow the tragedy of people taking their lives has anything to do with this project, or that this project shouldn't happen in order to honor those who do, I think is a very, very twisted idea about values. That somehow, whatever the painful personal circumstances that lead to suicide, the idea that that energy that is the final, in a way, negation of life should prevail over what I believe is the celebration of life. I think it would be a very sad outcome. I think the fact is that I personally, and everybody, this isn't about me actually. The fact is this project has happened because a lot of people have wanted it to happen, and a lot of people from this town. And it's incredibly humbling to me that somehow that desire to do something that isn't, strictly speaking, ordinary. We were talking about this earlier. There is a kind of culture here, in a way, of complicity, or in some way, if there isn't a precedent for something, well, then that must be really like bad, so you better not do it. It's almost like you have to ask somebody for permission. And I think that's changing, and I think that this project is an example of a very, very profound change of mentality, that actually you can do things that haven't been done before. Actually, this project has been done before, so it's not exactly groundbreaking. But maybe, this is an incredibly vital city that has fought in so many ways, and I was hoping that we could talk about that, to discover and celebrate its own identity, both, as it were, its post-colonial identity, and now its new identity in contrast to the great dragon nation, to China, while being part of it. And in doing so, I think, Hong Kong is going to have a very important role to play in terms of what China's values become. And yeah, I'm sorry that this is now turning into some kind of political speech, which it isn't. I just see this. This is a demonstration, a symptom, a sign of a collective will to make something that hasn't happened like this before here happen. And I sincerely hope that it allows all sorts of things that haven't happened before here to happen. I think on that note, we should call it a day. But thank you very, very much for having me. Thank you. Good.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.